There you go. So good morning. Sorry, good afternoon. It's way afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Germinator. My name is Alon Eisenstein. I'm an associate professor of teaching in entrepreneurship at the School of Engineering at UBC Okanagan campus. Today, I have a pleasure of having conversation with Paul Heidebrecht, and we'll talk about his work on peace education and how is that related to engineering and entrepreneurship. So I'm super excited about that. Before I introduce Paul to you and a quick bio, I do want to start by respectfully acknowledging that I'm hosting this session from my office on UBC Okanagan campus, which is situated on the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And as part of recognizing that, and in the spirit of our discussion on peace, I think it's only appropriate to recognize Chief Sukanchut, who is recognized by the Syilx community for his work on embracing peace and allowing and leading the Syilx community as they were navigating the transition of living from before and into the living with the settlers who were situating themselves in the Okanagan Valley, and really appreciating and understanding the role of leadership is manifested in times of change. And so I can't think of a better a person to highlight and recognize and give credit to for his role and legacy for the Syilx people in a time of unprecedented change for that community back in the day. This picture specifically is of the statue of Chief Sukanchut, which is situated in the downtown Kelowna and gazing towards the west side of Kelowna, the West Kelowna side, so the west side of Lake Okanagan. I also want to recognize that the word chief is not the word for Syilx for leader. Rather, it is ilmichum, which essentially symbolizes this idea of leaders bringing people together. So the yil, starting the yilmichum, is the same yil as Syilx, which is the root of twisting strands together to form a rope, which is stronger together than the individual strands. So again, kind of symbolizing through language how the role of a leader in times of change is so important, especially promoting peace and allowing people to live safely with others in their vicinity. I'd like to now welcome Paul, and just very kind of quickly going through the bio. Some of it is shared online on the website. So first of all, Paul is the inaugural director of the Kindred Credit Union Centre for Peace Advancement. He teaches peace and conflict studies at the Conrad Grebel University College and the University of Waterloo. He's also the member of the Waterloo Innovation Ecosystem Council and a fellow of the Balsillie School of International Affairs. Paul's background is varied. He earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Waterloo, then a master's degree in theological studies from Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminar in Elkhart, is that Indiana? Yes, and then a PhD in religious studies from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so Paul's research interests include the intersection of peace building, social innovation, technology, and ethics. And he has been leveraging academic preparation and professional experience in both engineering and the humanities to spark emerging field of PeaceTech, which I'm super excited to learn more about and hear of Paul about this experience. And it's really about bringing social impact of technology, using technology to augment the efforts of civil society and social purpose businesses and government to advance peace and justice. Now, most recently, because we are officially now in January of 2026, Paul was appointed as Project Plowshares Director, and this new arrangement is continuing his role as Director of the Center for Peace Advancement, half-time, and stepping back from some of his previous teaching and research activity. And he will devote time and energy for, I guess, both. So I guess two feet on two sides of the world of, I guess, peace building. So Paul, welcome, and thank you so much for accepting my invitation to join here at the Germinator.
Yeah, pleased to be here. Thanks for the introduction.
Um, Sorry, I'm just gonna make sure my video is also mute. Okay, so Paul, the Germinator, for those of people who don't know, and again, this is, I guess, your first time on a Germinator, is a place where I really enjoy speaking with people about um, how they ended up where they are, and usually in unexpected ways. And I think when most people think of going to engineering, and I'm teaching at the School of Engineering, so doing an undergraduate, a bachelor's degree in applied science or in engineering, and then fast forward to where you are today, advancing this concept of PeaceTech. So I would love to go deep into how the evolution of your career professionally, and see kind of where we end up, and see what all this has to do together between, I guess, the world of entrepreneurship, engineering, peace building is fascinating Venn diagram to dig deep into. So maybe kind of going from the start. I mean, you graduated with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, um,
Mhm.
and then what? What were you hoping to do with that? And was this peace building on the agenda from back then, or is that kind of emerged after?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a fair question, and maybe just at the start to say, yeah, really happy to be joining you tonight. I think this probably came up when we met. But in my own teaching, I incorporate a lot of interviews and conversations with engineers doing interesting things is how I frame it for some of the teaching I do, and yeah, and it's always just an interesting path to unwind that's impossible to have mapped out in advance, and so that certainly holds for me. So, but starting at the beginning, and again, I think a fairly common thing for people who choose to study engineering is there's a particular interest. It's not necessarily being interested in engineering in general or technology in general, but often there's a particular thing that really lights somebody's fire. And for me, and this is probably not where you're expecting me to go, my interest was in designing racing cars. So about as purely and well, yeah, purely and simply like interested in the technology of racing cars, aerodynamics and vehicle dynamics, and that was my passion. That's why I chose to study mechanical engineering, and um, and um, and where I saw myself going professionally early on. And I had the good fortune of being in a co-op program here at Waterloo, and so I found myself engineering racing cars earlier than I thought I would, and it was a fabulous experience. I learned a ton, and also learned that I had a hard time seeing myself doing that professionally longer term. That there are a lot of other interests I had, and interests that were actually fueled in large part by kind of the relationships and the connections that I was building at university. So I was actually part of the residence community at Conrad Grebel University College, one of the affiliated colleges at the University of Waterloo. And so I had roommates who were in history and accounting and biology, and yeah, and found myself interested and drawn to asking bigger questions about technology than simply how to make a car go fast early on. And kind of came to a fork in the road actually in my undergrad studies. Conrad Grebel is the home for the Peace and Conflict Studies program at Waterloo, and I got to know some faculty who taught Peace and Conflict Studies and took a course as an elective, and and I yeah, I mean, I should maybe mention too, Waterloo is known for many things. Might not know that it's also the home to the oldest peace studies program in Canada. Started in the 1970s, back before peace was seen as a credible academic discipline or a worthy field of study, academic study. But nonetheless, anyway, had this exposure in a course and came to a fork in the road. After a couple of terms working for a racing car team, I had an opportunity to work for a supplier to the Formula One, to Formula One teams, and an opportunity to do a peace and conflict studies internship overseas, where I didn't get paid anything, but got to work in an appropriate technology group that was basically trying to find creative ways of using technology to support job creation projects in Bangladesh. And that's the fork, or it's the fork I chose, and opened me up to the world in very interesting new ways, and to kind of fueled my eagerness to dig into understanding the root causes of development shortcomings, of geopolitical issues, and so I would trace it back to then. Already as an undergrad, realizing, okay, I'm not going to be a race car engineer. I'm going to be something else, but not having a clue what that really would entail. But really fortunate again to have that exposure and to be a part of a community that nurtured curiosity and interest far beyond my academic specialty.
Okay. So and I find it really intriguing that I think you said it was an elective course.
Mm-hmm.
So how a single elective course can have such a profound impact on someone's life, and having that moment of realization. So moving kind of fast forward, jumping into post-graduation, again, your grad work, again, very much not engineering grad work. And I think the most, there was a study done a couple of years ago looking at, what are the pathways for engineers to do grad work. And I think, the most often grad work for engineers is, of course, engineering graduate work. And I think the second most common would be an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if theology and religion is going to be high up on the list. So how did that go about? Was that more work that led to that, or is that kind of direct continuation from undergrad to grad work?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably nothing as diametrically opposed as like an engineering course and a philosophy or a theology or an ethics course in grad school. I mean, I should say, like, again, I was pretty single-minded in terms of my career ambitions as a young adult, and yet I also, I had a lot of other interests prior to coming to university as well. And one practice that continued from high school on was I just loved to read. And so even as an engineering student, not for academic credit or in academic courses, I did read a lot. And that's probably the one crucial skill set and not just aptitude, but something that people enjoy to go on to graduate school in the humanities. So I had that going for me, but I had a lot of other things that weren't going for me in terms of undergraduate preparation, foundational knowledge, and in the history and of philosophy and theology and ethics, for example. But so it was a big adjustment, and it didn't happen right away. So again, when I graduated, I didn't know what the non-engineering thing would be, but I had to find work and do something meaningful. And so I carried on. I ended up my first job after graduation was a version of working for another racing car team. I was part of a startup that was developing an alternative fuel sports car, a supercar. Back in the 1990s, we were looking at alternative fuels, cleaner burning things like natural gas and so on. And so I kept working as an engineer actually for all in all, between stints in grad school, 5 or 6 or maybe even more years in the automotive industry, and kind of paying the bills, but also, I just enjoyed design. I enjoyed kind of that the creative side of engineering too. So I didn't completely, turn my back on that. But that also gave me time to be reading. I TA'd a course in society, technology, and values for several years, kind of trying to explore, thinking about teaching and thinking about other fields where bigger questions of technology were explored, and Yeah, and I settled on graduate studies in theology in part because my wife's interests, and I kind of tagged along with her. She's a minister in the Mennonite tradition, so a small Christian tradition that from its foundations were really prioritized peace and peacemaking. Yeah, but also I realized some because of the tradition I'm a part of, that really foundational questions often drill back to how we make meaning of the world, and like worldviews and fundamental understandings. And that's where like religion made sense to drill down, really to go deep when it comes to how we engage with technology, how we make meaning in the world. Religion seemed like the place to start, and so that's where I went.
Very cool. Um, my follow-up question is now kind of asking, so you're going maybe closer to the topic of our discussion, which is this idea of PeaceTech and how it ties all these threads together. But I do want to give some of the people in the audience who might be students, if they have any questions on that trajectory, which is, again, I find so interesting, having the ability to kind of balance the multiple interests that we all carry and say, this is now what I'm not just interested in, but I'm investing in this education. And then, sometime later, doing very different investment in a different education. And I can speak from my experience. Again, I'm teaching entrepreneurship in a school of engineering, and I did chemistry for the longest of time, and then specializing in education. So I think I have similar appreciation for how our interest takes us in unpredictable way. So I don't know if anybody in the audience, if a student or a faculty or parent, have any question about the unexpected turns of the life of a professional.
Probably the last thing a parent would want to hear is go study engineering, and then they'll get a PhD in the humanities afterwards.
Yeah, or maybe it's comforting to know that it's not a done deal, right? That doesn't mean that you're married to it definitively anyway. Some people are. I don't see any hands going up, going twice. Okay, I'll continue. And maybe everybody is also kind of eager to hear. So I've read a few of the papers that you've published, I guess, online, on this idea of PeaceTech. But for those who haven't done their pre-reading for today, what's the short version? What is PeaceTech all about?
Yeah, so maybe as hopefully the name implies, like PeaceTech is the intersection of peace building and technology, and both of those, there might be need to like back up and talk a little bit about peace and conflict studies or peace building as a field, because I'm not presuming people might not be aware of it. But in short, I would say PeaceTech is seeking creative applications and uses for technology to help enable the building of peace, right? So the role, finding ways of building and using technology that can help advance peace. But there's also the flip side of PeaceTech, and the whole folks involved in that space who are to identify as doing work in the domain of PeaceTech are also thinking critically, like applying insights from peace building to think critically about the role of technology in our society and its contributions to the world, right, for both good and ill. And so there's a critical lens as well as a creative side to the work of PeaceTech. And we try and work at both of those in the sector I'm a part of, for sure. But other people in different parts of the world might identify with one or the other side more strongly. But maybe I could, in terms of like, how did I get into that? There too, this is like, I would say more of a serendipitous journey rather than like by design. So like after graduate school, I mean, just to fast forward, like 11, 12 years ago, I was invited to be the inaugural director of this new Center for Peace Advancement opening at the University of Waterloo. And just a little bit about the center, like it really is an expression of the history of how peace and conflict studies has been pursued at our college and at our university. on, operating on the assumption that peace isn't just something to be studied or to be researched, but it's something to be practiced. And so from the beginning at the college, there was always this eagerness to build in space, literally, into the community for the people doing peace in the world. And so Peace Project Plowshares, the organization I'm now providing leadership for, started 50 years ago, around the same time as the academic program started. And so this was an effort to work at disarmament. So this was the height of, the buildup of the Cold War and growing fears and concerns about nuclear war, and civil society and activists and researchers were working hard to try and address that concern by helping the world disarm rather than build up its weapons. So we had faculty early on in peace and conflict studies who had offices right next door to people who were doing policy research on nuclear weapons and the arms trade and issues like that. And lots of other different expressions for how peace is built, apart from that were a part of the community. And that's kind of the spirit and nature of the program ever since. The notion is peace is everybody's business. And so regardless of what you're studying at Waterloo, you would benefit as a citizen and as a biologist or chemist or engineer or historian by a better grasp and understanding of peace and conflict studies, whether it's applied in your personal context and how you interact on teams or provide leadership in your community, or also in more significant ways between institutions and even national and global issues. So that's really the mantra: peace is everybody's business. And so when I was hired, I co-taught a new course with a colleague, the chair of the Peace and Conflict Studies program, where we broke up the curriculum around all 6 faculties in Waterloo. And we had units on peace and the arts and et cetera, et cetera. And we got to peace and engineering, and my colleague said, I really, he had a hard time understanding how we would have enough material for a couple of classes talking about peace and engineering. And the next year I started teaching a course called Peace and Engineering, and I've taught that every year since. So there's more than enough material and more than enough eagerness among engineering students to dig into the intersection of engineering and peace. But that's an example of how PeaceTech and the research activity and the projects that our center has been fostering is really a product of our context. Like looking around and saying, like at Waterloo, if peace is everybody's business, at a tech-focused institution, like we've got to grapple with technology in a meaningful way, right? And so it wasn't, it was fortuitous, serendipitous that I happened to come from a background in which I'd been thinking and writing about technology for a long time and having worked as an engineer. But I'll tell you, I was not hired as the director of the center because somebody had the idea that we would be, at the foreground of emerging movement around PeaceTech. That's kind of a product of the ingredients that were assembled 11, 12 years ago.
So teaching peace and engineering, what would you say is the most common misunderstood part about peace for engineers, or maybe we can expand it to not just engineers, but all the, let's say, quote unquote science-minded people, whether it's physical or applied science. What is it that our scientists in the room often misunderstand about?
Yeah. A couple of things I would say. First of all, most people, when they think of peace studies or peace building or peace and conflict studies, they think, and particularly those coming from the sciences or the engineering, STEM fields, they think it's pretty mushy, fuzzy business. There are like idealistic, well-intentioned people out there who might go to rallies or organize protests or write letters or complain about the world, but it's not serious stuff. And so I think one of the big windows in that gets opened early on is realizing, oh, wait a minute, it's a very young field. Like I said, 50 years ago, there were no other peace and conflict studies programs in Canada. Peace building is clearly emerged as a discipline in its own right, and there are people doing serious academic scholarship and serious professional work, right? It's not professionalized to the same degree as engineering, or it's on a much earlier trajectory, some would say. So that's the first thing, that actually peace is like serious business. These are serious people who really kind of know their stuff, right? And there's a kind of a window opened into some of the complexities and skills and theories that have evolved over the years. So that's one. But I'm actually not all that concerned about trying to get people to take peace seriously. I mean, most people who are taking this course are already like genuinely interested in understanding like what the heck's going on in the world and how do we how do we do it. I think the other big insight or misconception is that I, as an engineer, don't have a role to play in peace building. Like maybe I'm convinced that it's serious business and there are good people, in good places doing good work, but that's somebody else's job, not mine. Let me stick to my, calculations or my lab or my whatever it is. And I think, and this relates to a broader misconception of peace, I think, or peace building, that it's really focused on negative peace. Like that to build peace means you just need to get rid of conflict and you need to stop violence. So that's what the job of peace building is. And I would say that's only a part of the job, maybe even a tiny fraction of what the work of peace building is really all about. That, well, for one, conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. Conflict can be generative and creative, and it's inevitable. We're always going to be having conflict interpersonally or between organizations or institutions or between nations. Like it's just inescapable. So let's not think that if we think the job of peace building is to remove conflict from the world, we're never going to achieve it. One, like that is hopelessly idealistic, but it's also missing part of the point that conflict is constructive and inevitable. Obviously, violent conflict or conflict taken too far is not, right? And so, I think it's important for peace building to address violence and to prevent violence or stop violence. That's maybe, we're certainly not going to get to peace as long as people are killing each other or harming each other through violence. But the real work of peace building is as people in the field would say, is about positive peace, of building positive peace. And so it's creating the enabling conditions for people to live in healthy relationships, interpersonally or societally. And so that means that virtually anything you do has a potential impact on creating the conditions for peace, right? That having access to clean water or safe sanitation facilities in a refugee camp might be actually the most important contribution that can be made to making the lives of people in that refugee camp more at peace, right? When women are vulnerable, having to travel far afield to get water or to, so from the perspective of positive peace, like I said, any one of the sustainable development goals, in a sense, could be seen as contributing toward the building of peace. Absent education and gender equity, and anyway, take away any of those SDGs, if they're going in the wrong direction, you can be pretty sure that we're heading away from peace rather than toward it. If not right away, then we're certainly sowing the conditions for conflict to emerge. And that's where, preventing conflict and creating the conditions for peaceful, healthy, just relationships is really the hard work of peace building. And that kind of work, again, like I said, touches every sphere of human activity in every profession.
Yeah, and definitely, I would echo, the fact that kind of rehashing the tagline, right? Peace is everybody's business, right? Maybe kind of going down to the engineering lens to this. I guess I'm not a trained engineer, and not being a trained engineer, I always have the more say anthropological view of, oh, look at all these engineers. I wonder why they do this and that, and how we teach engineers and teaching engineering in general. And so I came across an interesting tidbit that I never kind of appreciated or questioned before, which is engineering emerged from a military occupation, and that's kind of the reason why we refer to civil engineering as a subdiscipline of engineering, contrasting it with engineering in general, which at that point in time of history was the default understanding to be military purposed. And so engineering without a qualifier is military use, and civil engineering is for non-military use. And I'm curious if you, again, as an engineer in training yourself and working in, again, non-military engineering in racing sports, and but now you're teaching in engineering programs, do you feel that that legacy still hovers over, or is that just at this point like a trivia, a history trivia for the nerdy engineering educators to kind of share in a cocktail party or something?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that history is relevant, continues to be relevant. We spend a lot of time in this engineering and peace class kind of unpacking engineering culture and worldview and just reflecting a little bit, and this is like in the context of these are students in an academic program, as opposed to, longstanding professionals who are part of engineering societies or other bodies. But nonetheless, I think there are facets of, I would argue, military culture that exhibit themselves in the history of engineering education and pedagogy. There's this, and I'm oversimplifying, there are, and other people have like kind of written on this too, right? But this assumption that, as an engineering student, your first job is one, to follow instructions, follow the orders, put your head down and work hard. The most common parallel to the experience of engineering students in Canadian institutions is it's like a boot camp, right? You've probably heard that in lots of different programs, right? This is about, it's like slogging to get through, not necessarily always knowing and understanding what you're doing, like why you're doing the things you're doing. It's more just about the point of working yourself really, really hard. So anyway, I could go on, but that's like just one example where I think kind of the ethos or the culture, the historical roots of engineering continue to exhibit themselves in the ethos and the culture of how we even teach engineering students today. So I don't think it's insignificant or incidental. Like, I think it's worth grappling with. I also think it's worth, reflecting on, the like outside of like direct military related roles. I mean, it's clear when you look at the history of Silicon Valley, for example, and the modern high tech sector, it was built on the backs of Pentagon funding in the Cold War, like post World War II. So many fields of engineering, even if they wouldn't have directly associated themselves or they don't see themselves as military contractors, are essentially the fruits of defense-related research and applications, and we're only seeing that, I think, coming to the fore all the more. And in recent months, as countries like Canada are talking about ramping up defense spending in very significant ways, and we're looking at dual use or multiple use technologies. So that interconnection between like some of the fundamental drivers of technological development are also much more recent than the and spill over into all kinds of other sectors of engineering work, and I think that's important to recognize too.
Yeah.
Can I maybe just say, so that's kind of like I think it's the obligation of engineer to understand that history. I also think there's lots of gifts that come from it, frankly, right? Like and I should also say, you asked about the surprises of engineering students coming into a peace and conflict studies class. I have to say, it's been a fabulous experience, and I think I found it much easier to engage engineering students at Waterloo in peace and conflict studies than than it's been trying to engage peace and conflict studies students in digging into technology, because I think there's a role for them to be playing in PeaceTech too. But technology is just so intimidating, and there's just this, as with many people in society, this assumption that it's this black box, and just tell me what the inputs need to be and what its outputs are, and everything that happens in between is kind of irrelevant to most of us. And I don't think it's irrelevant. Actually, I think understanding how things work is really important if you want to think about how we might want to regulate this technology, right? Or what some of the other consequences or impacts might be. So I do think there's, just to say, I think there are more windows that need to be opened into the world of engineers for people beyond that world than it's not just, it's got to go in one direction. And that's my, actually the bigger frustration for me is the inability to have meaningful engagement between engineering students and peace and conflict studies students because of that. Anyway, and the other thing I would say is that that legacy and that culture and that ethos of engineering, has might raise some questions, particularly if we're thinking about, more enlightened perspectives around student well-being, minimally. But also, I would say like there is like incredible power and potential in the culture of engineering that can be tapped into when it comes to like the world's most pressing challenges, right? And I want somebody to get involved in a peace building project who's gonna like buckle down and put their shoulder into it and work really, really hard to solve it, because it is hard, serious work too, right? We need that mentality, and we also need kind of that can-do sense that, hey, like I might struggle, I might fail, but eventually I might be able to figure this out, right? Like that kind of can-do spirit is incredible, and I think we need more of that in other fields as well. I think that's a real gift that engineering has. So I don't want to just suggest that everything about engineering culture is problematic either.
Yeah, thank you for that. See, Barb, you have a question or comment or
Yes,
both?
I do. Yeah, yes. I really like what you're talking about with be conscious of peace with every step we take. What are you seeing as the really important steps right now?
In the world writ large, or
Yeah. Well, certainly in Canada, because we've got to kind of deal with some of these things, and there's pockets of peace and not peace, and what are you finding is working right now?
yeah, well, it's not hard to get a little like to despair with the state of the world and how that might get reflected in our own communities as well. I think, and I think it's important for us, anybody working with technology, to grapple with the impacts that technologies are playing to drive people apart as opposed to bringing people together. I am, like, where I sit and kind of the projects and communities I'm a part of, I feel really fortunate to get these windows into these amazing experiments where people are putting their shoulder to it and saying, okay, there's got to be a better way than Facebook and other, large big tech platforms to connect people. What are ways where we can bring people together that actually foster and foreground what we have in common rather than what sets us apart, that enable us to, even at scale, make decisions, come to consensus around things rather than, the either or, we're either you're going to vote it up or vote it down. So I do think, there are lots of like amazing experiments to be found, and maybe not surprisingly, some of those experiments are found in some of the toughest places, around the world. So there's a lot that we can be taught. So I think part of my teaching, my research, and the work in the center is really foregrounding like these maybe not like particularly in light of how global events, not global level changes, but small changes where good things are actually happening, and more importantly, I think for students, where we can actually feel or taste the sense that, a change is actually possible, right? I think that's the biggest challenge with people working toward peace or addressing, social harms right now, is the extent to which, we're just kind of paralyzed, and we have this sense that like what can possibly be done. But if you can actually experience a taste, even to a small degree. So we have a startup in our incubator that's working on this really vexing challenge of how to help Syrians who've lost loved ones figure out what happened to them. And there are like hundreds of thousands of Syrians who've gone missing since 2012, where their family members don't know what happened to them. Probably not good things happen to those people, but getting closure and finding out what happened is a real hard thing. Yeah, and here you have like a Syrian refugee in Canada who's developed a platform and is working actively with networks of researchers, government agencies, and the Syrian diaspora community in Canada to help make connections. And and the fuel for this project is the fact that they've brought in closure, to one, and then two, and then a few dozen, and then some hundreds of cases, and realized, oh, okay, there is something we can do here. They haven't figured it out. It's a huge challenge. Who's going to pay for it? How can you scale it? All the things that entrepreneurs and engineers are always grappling with in other contexts. But getting that tangible sense of a change is a precious commodity.
Yeah, small change is really, consensus building is really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Barb. And I saw Ladan was with the hand raised as well. I don't know if you want to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask a question that you eventually kind of answered. I was going to ask about if you can share an initiative or a project. You talk about the Syrian refugees. I think that was one of the examples, but I just wanted to ask if like you have any more recent projects that your team has worked on, including like some of the technicals or social challenges that involves to, for me as a person in tech, to just be more aware of non-technical side of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I apologize. Any good like explanation of PeaceTech should have like gone immediately to some concrete examples, and that would have probably made it much more obvious. So the incubator program that I run in our center has worked with 36 or so startups since it was established. So it's a small incubator program for recent graduates is our primary focus, and grad students who've got some kind of startup driving toward a peace and justice impact. And again, this is peace in the positive sense of the word, right? And so that could touch on a whole host of different kinds of issues. A good number, probably about a third of them, I would characterize as a PeaceTech startup. So somebody using technology in an instrumental, strategic way to advance some kind of broader impact. Find Suri, the platform to help find missing Syrians, would be one example of that. Early on, one of our first projects was a team of engineering students led by a Cambodian Canadian who were addressing the issue of landmines in Cambodia. And the bottleneck in the process of clearing landmines is not actually locating them. There have been dozens of creative efforts to try and accelerate that process. It's really getting them out of the ground. And the state of the art is somebody suits up in body armor and they get a hand shovel and they painstakingly dig that out to be then taken somewhere where it can be safely exploded. And so they developed a robot to remotely excavate and then transfer for detonation landmines in Cambodia. So a robotics application. So there's hardware, there's software. One of the most recent projects is called Groupthink Labs, and they're getting into this deliberative democracy space that I was alluding to before. So it's a platform to help groups. It could be a smaller group, it could be at the level of a city or a municipality, come to consensus on setting priorities around budgeting and decision making. So it's again a version of an online platform. So lots of different applications and uses of technology. But hopefully that helps to flesh it out a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I think there was another hand raised a moment ago.
Yeah. So it's me. Thank you for sharing great insights and vision. I have several questions related to the PeaceTech. The one simple question is that what can be the action items as a students or normal citizens? That is the one question about the PeaceTech. And the second question is more serious. So between countries, there are many conflicts in the world, and some people insist that for the peace, the power balance between adjacent countries must be needed. Otherwise, the situation may lead to war. So from your perspective, what would be the role of PeaceTech in this situation?
Yeah, thanks for those questions. I mean, so there's a lot of enthusiasm right now around simulations and mediation processes using AI, and so you can, if you look this up, you'll see there's some really interesting experiments that are being conducted right now. I think I think there's there's a role for creative ways of bringing people together and helping them come to insights more quickly than they otherwise might. I think that's a fundamental challenge when it comes to geopolitical issues and challenges and conflicts. The reality is, so one of our senior research fellows in the center wrote a book a few years ago around kind of understanding conflicts, and and again, a very data-driven approach where they were looking at armed conflicts in the 20th century and beyond, so up until I think about 2010, and the reality is that the vast majority, as in like more than 90% of armed conflicts, end in some version of a negotiated stalemate. They don't end in a victory of one side or the other, right? And we can probably think of like some obvious examples right now where it's pretty rare for once guns start shooting and bombs are dropped that one side emerges triumphant and there's a clear victory and then something is negotiated in that context. Almost inevitably, there's some kind of negotiation. So I think the fundamental impulse needs to be, how do we get to negotiations sooner once conflict does break out? We're going to get there eventually. And so that's where some of these tools might be helpful in terms of helping people play out scenarios and recognize that, like we can either keep spending, our blood and our treasure for, another 5 years and get to the same point, or we can get to that point now, right? So there could be some constructive roles to play, but I would say that is probably, when it comes to geopolitical conflict, the most important insight to come to terms with. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's an easy lesson to be learned. We always assume that there's some nuance or exception in our circumstance. And then your other question about the role of students or ways of getting involved, like I think, some of the projects I alluded to, started as student-driven projects. All of them, maybe not surprisingly, and I think a general lesson in terms of entrepreneurship more generally, but particularly when it comes to social entrepreneurship, right, is you should be working on a problem that you have some proximity to, some direct connection to, right? That's going to be the fuel that continues to motivate you to put energy into it, but it's going to give you the insights you need to actually make a unique contribution. So I guess that's one lesson that we see played out again and again, right? It's not surprising that it was somebody who came to Canada from Cambodia when he was 13, that he was well positioned to develop a robotics startup to address landmines in Cambodia, or that, a Syrian Canadian is the person who's going to actually be able to marshal the resources and pull together the teams and make the connections to actually make a meaningful impact. So that's, I would say, regardless of your interests or where you see yourself going, like starting with the things that are proximate to you is a good thing to take in mind. But when it comes to like peace and tech, and particularly the critical reflections and engagement on this, I think there's so much room to be played by us as citizens and as professionals. And let me give you an example. So Project Plowshares, the organization that I'm now directing, has been working on global efforts to regulate the applications of AI to weapons systems. This has been going on for 12, 13 years. There's been an international campaign and a network and people engaging at UN fora to try and think about, just as we negotiated the Ottawa Treaty to ban landmines or the Chemical Weapons Treaty to ban chemical weapons, like thinking about the applications of AI to weapon systems is pretty terrifying. And it's only getting more terrifying as we see them put into use in all kinds of ways. One important contribution for PeaceTech is in that regulatory space, bringing together people who understand how the technology works and is being developed, what the incentive structures are, and how there might be meaningful ways of getting our arms around that as a global community. And what's so interesting is it's not just policy wonks who are informing that, but it's technical experts. And so Ryan Garapi is the founder of a company called ClearPath Robotics, based here in Waterloo. He's an engineering grad. He's been the CTO of ClearPath. They were recently acquired by Rockwell. He's now in a VP role at Rockwell. He takes time out of his busy work as a tech sector leader to be engaging in groups of experts that are informing these policy conversations, because he knows better than the policy wonks what's going on in the research labs, right? What's the potential? What are the incentives within industry? And how does this stuff actually really work? Now, that's at a really high level, but I think at a much lower level, there are roles for engineers to be injecting their voice and their perspective, not only as concerned citizens, but as technical experts into community level conversations, right? Anyway, there's myriad of applications. And I think we need to do a better job in universities and opening the eyes of our engineering students to recognize, oh yeah, like I have something to offer there too. And creating those pathways. But I think the message is there are a lot of opportunities that go begging, because people don't take them up. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So, Paul, we are practically at time, and I still have lots of questions, but we will respect your time and the time of our guests. This has been a fascinating talk, and literally just the tip of the iceberg for what is a deeper long-term engagement. Before wrapping up and thanking you again, I do want to just highlight to folks that my next guest will be in 2 weeks, and that would be Stephanie Nicios. And I find that, the way you're framing PeaceTech and peace being everybody's business, and again, kind of linking it to this idea of violent conflict, I think captures really well how violent we are against the environment. And so I think Stephanie is an absolute fantastic role model, an engineer turned entrepreneur, and trying to make a difference in this world about making the business case that looking at the climate and where it's heading should be everybody's business, not just the climate activist and the environmentalist, but every single business living today, if they're not thinking about the business case for climate and how it's impacting them, not just how you impact the climate, but how climate will impact you, is literally daydreaming and walking in their sleep, and will be finding themselves in a very tough situation sooner than we would like to admit. So I guess with that, I want to thank everybody for joining today. Paul, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure meeting you in Oxford at the Map the System, and I hope that you are joining Map the System in Oxford again this year, and hope to see you again in person this summer. And I think, to me, the biggest takeaway, and I'm going to have to kind of think it through and how I see this in my world, is the fact that you mentioned how receptive engineers are to engage in these discussions on peace and peace building and conflict. And yet, from the other side, those who are, this is their specialty, have an engineering aversion or technology aversion. And to some extent, I guess the bigger picture as an educator and a pedagogue, how does that reflect on how we teach and enculturate people to think about technology is not for me, or peace building is not for me, as opposed to embracing a more holistic, let's say, morally driven, engaged citizens in across all their interests in their lives, in a way that I think your career embodies so well. So thank you very much for sharing your insight with us today.
Yeah, this was great. Glad to be a part of the conversation, and yeah, Ilan, I hope we see each other in Oxford.
So,
and I'll have to loop you into to one of my engineering and peace classes in the future too. So yeah,
please do. I would love the opportunity.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day, and stay safe, and hoping for a more peaceful afternoon and world at large.
Take care.
Bye.